Washington was born on February 22, 1732, to Augustine and Mary Washington in Westmoreland County, Virginia. In 1735, the family moved to what is now Mount Vernon. He was the oldest son and helped his father on the farm. They were a middle-class, slave-holding family. Washington was homeschooled, but little else is known about his childhood. He learned a lot from hands-on experiences with the plantation foreman. His father died when he was 11, making him a ward of his half-brother, Lawrence. Lawrence was married to Anne Fairfax, which was a prominent family at the time. Washington was taught about high colonial society. In 1748, Washington joined a surveying group in Virginia's Western Territory. The next year, he was appointed the official surveyor of Culpeper County. Lawrence died from tuberculosis in July of 1752. With his death, Washington inherited the estate of Mount Vernon. He was 20 years old. Washington fought in numerous conflicts before the American Revolution. Washington had been appointed a rank of major in the Virginia militia. He started the French and Indian War. Washington's small force attacked a French post, killing the commander and 9 others and taking the rest prisoners. In retaliation, Washington was attacked by the French and captured. He was released soon afterwards. Washington was given the rank of colonel. He and British General Edward Braddock planned an assault on Fort Duquesne, Fort Niagara, and Crown Point. They were ambushed, and Braddock was killed. Washington was forced to retreat. At the age of 23, Washington was made commander of all Virginian troops. In 1758, Washington attacked Fort Duquesne again. During this attack, the British were able to capture the fort. Washington retired from military service in 1758 and returned to Mount Vernon. He entered politics and was elected to the House of Burgesses. George Washington married Martha Dandridge Cutsis after he retired from the military. She had 2 children from a previous marriage, and Washington loved them both. She also had a large amount of land. With this new land, Washington was one of the wealthiest landowners in Virginia. Over the following years before the Revolution, Washington worked his land. The most notable negative attribute of Washington was he had more than 300 slaves at Mount Vernon. It is said that he disliked slavery, but accepted the fact that it was legal. He requested that his slaves be set free when his wife Martha died. Washington didn't like the imposing British's taxes on the colonists, but didn't support independence until the Townshend Act of 1767. In 1769, Washington introduced a resolution to the House of Burgesses calling for Virginia to boycott British goods until the acts were repealed. He was selected to be a delegate to the First Continental Congress in March of 1775. At the Second Continental Congress, Washington came dressed in his military uniform. He was appointed the Major General and Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army on June 15th. Throughout the war, Washington had many battles with defeats and victories, and at the Battle of Yorktown, the Revolution ended. Washington convinced Congress to get soldiers a 5-year bonus in 1783, and the British evacuated New York City. He told his soldiers goodbye and returned to his farm to resume a peaceful life. And that didn't last long. With the Articles of Confederation and the state government struggling, Washington felt something had to be done, but remained neutral in politics until Shays' Rebellion. The Constitutional Convention was held to amend the Articles of Confederation. Washington, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton all agreed that a new constitution needed to be drafted to give the national government more power. Washington was chosen unanimously to be the first president of the United States. He is the only president to ever get a unanimous approval. He preferred to be called Mr. President in order to distance himself from royal titles. Washington didn't accept his $25,000 salary because of his wealth, but Congress convinced him to take it to imply that the office of the presidency wasn't just for the wealthy. He was a very good president and set a high standard for the office. He reduced the nation's debt and gave the country financial grounds. He was able to establish peace treaties with Native Americans. He put a quick end to the Whiskey Rebellion, where he marched with the troops into battle. This is the only time the sitting president has led troops in battle. Washington was a 2-term president and could have been elected to a 3rd term, but was frustrated with the growing partisanship in the nation's policies and wished to return to his home in Mount Vernon. He was also aware that being the first president, he was setting the expectation for the office. In March of 1797, he turned the nation over to John Adams and returned home. In his remaining years, he tended his farm and lived a simple life. On December 13th of 1799, he awoke very sick, and it progressed throughout the day. The doctors drained his blood, thinking this was a cure for his ailments, but on December 14th, he died at the age of 67. The entire country mourned Washington's death. I hope you've enjoyed learning about the first president of the United States, George Washington. He was an honorable man who could have been king, but instead set in place a standard for the presidency that is still followed today, for the most part. You may be wondering, what does George Washington have to do with Kentucky? First, he owned land in Grayson County, but he never stepped foot in Kentucky. Also, many places in the state are named after him. Washington is a neighborhood in Maysville that was one of the first towns settled in Kentucky, and it was named after George Washington. Mount Vernon, Kentucky is named after Washington's homestead, and Washington County, the 10th county of Kentucky, was named after George Washington. Don't forget to try out audibletrial.com/kyhistorypod to get a free book of your choosing, maybe about George Washington. Like, subscribe, and share this video in the Kentucky History channel for more Kentucky history content. If you'd like to support the channel, check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/kyhistorypod. Find us on Twitter and Facebook at kyhistorypod and Instagram at Kentucky History Podcast. And don't forget to check out the Land Between the Meadows Kentucky History Podcast for more in-depth history of Kentucky. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.